Welcome to the Roost Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Bowhunter. And now, your host, Josh Grund.
Yes, I walked back there, and it was glorious, but we'll get to that. Yes. So, what is going on, everybody? Thank you for joining us again. Hopefully, you have watched the video at this point. If not, you could listen to this first and then go watch the video. But I ended up tagging out in Ohio opening evening, and we wanted to just have a quick podcast to just kind of tell the story, talk about it a little bit, some things I learned. And I'm pretty excited. John ended up coming out and helping me drag the deer out, but we'll get to that.
You checked it off the bucket list, man. Opening day buck.
Crazy, man.
Giddy up, man. Giddy up. 2024.
I couldn't believe it, dude. So I kept this buck kind of under wraps. Like, you knew about it. A couple of my, close friends and my family knew about it, but I didn't really talk about it on the channel. I didn't post, photos of it on my Instagram or anything like that on Facebook all summer long, just because I've done that in the past. And, I've run into some goofy things before. So, I was getting pictures of this buck since, when was it? Memorial Day. I remember I came out to your place up north on Memorial Day, and I got a grainy picture. And if you guys use those Tacticams, you always get the first pictures you get are always kind of grainy. You can kind of tell what it is. But then you have to, buy the HD version, and then you got to wait for it to come, unless you have the higher package or something. So I get this picture of this buck, dude, and it's down along this creek where I've been talking about for a while, wanting to hunt this creek bottom, and there's a big trail that kind of runs along the creek. And I remember getting a picture of this buck, and it just had these, it looked like these clubs just coming out of its head. It just looked big, but you couldn't really tell anything that was going on. His head was down in the grass. So I get that HD version. I'm waiting. I remember the whole time I'm with you, up there, my girlfriend's there, and we're doing hunting stuff. And I'm just like, dude, come on, HD picture. And I got that HD picture. I think it was after I left your place on the way home or something. And it was just a big deer, dude. You could tell he had a sway belly, and he had some tree trunks coming out of his head, which you aptly named him Two Trunks.
Yeah. Two trunks.
So
he literally looked like he had two tree trunks coming out of the, one pedicle. He was a double beamer, but he didn't have anything coming off till at the end.
Yeah.
And it looked like two trees coming off his head.
Such a cool deer. And I started getting pictures of him pretty consistently on this one camera. And this is a 45-acre chunk of property. I got 3 or 4 cameras on it all summer. And I'm only really getting pictures of him on this one camera down by the creek. And I'd probably see him once a week, maybe twice a week if I was lucky. And I'd get pictures of him, and I'd just watch him grow all summer, man. And this deer just kept getting bigger and bigger. And every time I'd get another picture of him, I'm like, oh my God, this thing is huge. I just was getting riled up, man. So excited to hunt this deer. Well, moving forward, so it was midway through the summer, actually, when I realized I recognized this buck. Right. So I actually had pictures of this deer on the same property from last year, and it's uncanny, man. It's the same freaking buck. I got 2 pictures of him where he's angled away and walking past the camera, and it's the same buck. And he's got such a unique rack that it's pretty obvious. And this is the buck that I called him the old bully buck last year, because I had a bunch of pictures of him around the mineral lick that I got on that property, and he'd show up and he'd just, and it just looked like he was running all these deer off. He was always puffed up in every picture. He just always looked pissed off. And I actually got Bryson there one evening to go after him, and didn't work out. But I realized it was this same buck. So what was cool about it was I didn't feel like I was in a hurry to kill him because of all of the history I had with this deer. He was kind of a homebody, and he never really left. He'd like disappear last year for a couple weeks at a time, but he'd always come back, and then he'd be around for a while, and then he'd disappear for like a week, and then he'd come back, and I'd get pictures of him again. So like I knew he wasn't just going to be one of those deer that disappeared. He was probably going to give me an opportunity at some point. I just had to play my cards right. And just watching the cameras and keeping track of, so I started like getting really into like the analytics and paying attention to exactly what this deer was doing, right?
So we were building a pattern, right?
Yes. Building a pattern.
In, when he left, what were the conditions? What were the
wind direction? What direction he was traveling? Yep.
Documenting it and recording it and putting it together.
Yes. So I had a map, and you know, I literally probably a week before deer season started here, I sat down and I went through every single picture I had of him, and just like you said, I wrote down the date and the time, and I wrote down the wind direction, I wrote down the direction he was traveling, I wrote down the temperature and all that kind of stuff to go along with each one of these pictures. And then I put those at each spots of where I got pictures of him at the camera on the map, if that makes sense. So as the season, you know, I said I only was really getting pictures of him on one camera. Well, as the summer progressed, I started getting pictures of him kind of branching out to these other cameras in different spots, and started that's when I really started putting a pattern together and saying like, okay, he's, you know, doing this on this wind and doing this on this wind. Well, I guess let me kind of explain the lay of the land so people kind of understand. This is, like I said, it's like a 40-acre chunk. Half of the property, it's just split in half by a creek, essentially. And this creek makes a huge bend on the property, cuts the property in half, and then swings up and goes along kind of the upper, you know, we'll call it west side of the property line. And the far side of the creek, the north side of the creek, is just thick, you know, floodplain, overgrown, like old select cut stuff, just beautiful thick bedding. And then the south side of the creek there's some thick stuff, but it's mostly like pasture, fields, houses, and then a road. So most of the deer activity, I think, is on the other side of the creek. And there's a big main trail that runs along the creek. Then there's a couple big main trails that run north and south through the middle of this, you know, thick select cut. I have a big mineral block to the north of this select cut that I have a camera on. I have a camera on this big main path that runs through the middle of the select cut. And then I got a camera on the creek. And like I said, the creek kind of makes a big U shape and creates like almost a peninsula or a point of like thick, you know, hammocky sort of, I don't know how to explain it. Just like there's dry islands and patches of, you know, cattails and swamp all through this little floodplain. Really good bedding. So anyways, with that said, I took all these pictures, put them all together, and essentially it was really obvious to me that this buck was using this little peninsula or around there, somewhere down in there to the west of my camera, to bed on east winds. So I would get pictures of him going into that bedding area in the mornings. I'd get pictures of him leaving that bedding area in the evenings down along the creek whenever I had an east wind. And then I would get pictures of him sometimes coming in from the north through that mineral lick on east winds, you know, in the mornings, coming into that bedding area from a different angle, like he was out, you know, on the town somewhere else that he normally wouldn't be. And then it was like literally, dude, when I didn't get pictures of him, it was like different winds. There weren't a lot of pictures where I had him on like moving on like a west wind or a north wind. It was literally like an east wind, a northeast wind, or a southeast wind and that's when I could pattern him. It was like literally the most patternable buck I've ever had on camera. Pretty wild. So obviously I put my plan together, and I'm thinking, the first east wind I get, I'm getting in there after that buck. And I had a tree picked out and everything down along the creek. And I remember talking to you because we were both watching. Sorry, I got a hair on me. We were both watching the weather because you were planning on coming and filming me for that first hunt, that first weekend. And I remember we talked 4 or 5 days before, and we're like, I don't know. The wind looks like it's going to be coming out of the south, because in order to hunt him, I really wanted like a northeast wind. So it's kind of blowing off of where I think he is. My tree stand is directly east of where I think he's bedding. So I don't really want a straight east wind. I don't really want a southeast wind. I want a north wind, if that makes sense. And I remember we're like, well, I don't know about the wind, blah, 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 because the forecast was goofy. And you had some other plans. So you ended up, I was like, dude, just go do those. Take care of that, and we'll hunt at another time. Don't worry about it. And I really wasn't planning on hunting.
It was, it was like a on and off rain showers, misty rain, very overcast, kind of a crummy sit, for comfort, but it's still warm. So do get wet, right? I know we talked about it. You're like, if the wind's bad, I'm not going to do it, but if it's marginal, it's so early in the season and it's such a small piece, and knowing that there are others, around that have permission on the same property that, could bugger it up for you. Yeah. A marginal wind, a crummy day, dude, you got to go for him, right?
Probably got to go for it. Exactly.
You probably got to go for him, because as soon as, he gets bumped out of that bed or knocked off his pattern,
done.
You may have to wait till November to see him again,
Yep. Exactly.
He'll just go over to the neighbors that he doesn't get bothered.
Exactly. Yeah,
I gotta go for it.
I had all that stuff kind of running through my head, and my plan was I'm just going to get to the farm at like 2:00, because like you said, I do share it with a couple other people. So I'm going to get there early and just kind of claim like, hey, I'm here.
I'm here today.
That's where I'm going. And I kind of just sat in my truck and played on my phone for a little bit and kind of started getting ready. I was listening to some podcasts and some music and stuff like that. And the wind was blowing northeast at that point when I pulled in. And there was supposed to be a switch from northeast to southeast about 4:00. Well, about 3:30, I'm packing up and I start heading back in there. And you got to walk up this big hill, and then it just drops down into this huge river valley. So I know the wind's going to be doing some different things when I get down in that river valley with that topography. And I was walking back there, and I'm just, dropping milkweed, and I get to the top of that hill and drop milkweed, and it just hit me right in the face, man. It's almost like directly south. It's perfect. I'm like, well, I gotta go hunting,
I'm in now.
Yeah, I gotta go. So, and it's just a perfect wind. So I dropped down in there, and I got the tree I wanted to hunt already in mind, and I walk right to it, and took me a little bit to get in the tree, and I had to clip some limbs and clip some branches. I did it pretty quietly. I had to clip one pretty big branch just to give me a lane to where I wanted to shoot to on the other side of the creek. And I ended up like lowering it down with my bow rope, just to be real quiet about it. But I got all set up and get my camera ready, and I'm feeling good.
Let me interrupt you quick.
Yep.
You're talking about prepping this tree, right?
Yeah.
And dude, all summer, as you were getting pictures on the regular, we had thrown around the idea of, dude, you got to get out there and prep that tree, man. Get your set in. But then, you were getting pictures at 7:30 in the morning, 9 in the morning, noon, 4:30, 7:30. Yep. We're like, dude, you can't go in there and prep that tree. He's gonna watch you prep it,
Yeah, that's a good point.
You're gonna ruin it before you even start. So, you just didn't do it because I honestly was pushing you. I'm like, dude, it's going to thunderstorm. Get out there, get soaking wet, and prep that tree. And, we just it never happened.
I never did it. And, part of me kind of believes that's why this deer got killed, why I killed this deer, was because I kind of took the chance that nobody was going to bother him over there on the other side of the creek all summer. And I don't think anybody did. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I wanted to do is go in there and hang my little set a couple weeks before deer season. I think more deer figure out what's going on and got you pegged with people who are, setting stands, within a month of deer season starting than you think, man. And the last thing I wanted to do was go in there and accidentally bump him or put ground scent on the ground, and he come through after dark and smell me and change up his pattern or something like that. The only time I went in there, I did go in there one time this summer, and that was only to change the batteries on that camera.
But you did it perfectly. On your way out, there was like a giant thunderstorm that rolled in.
Yes, yep.
Rained down on everything.
And I did it in the time, like when he lost his velvet, he disappeared. Like I didn't get pictures of him for like almost a month. Remember that?
Yeah,
Yeah, and like I didn't get pictures of him for a long time, like almost the whole month of August. And I went in to hang. Yeah, it was literally when I was in Kentucky, I got my first picture back of him after 3 weeks. So that's when I went in to change those camera batteries. The camera wasn't quite dead, but it was getting dead. I'm like, dude, I just need to get in there, change those batteries before he comes back, because I think he probably went somewhere for, deer will take little vacations and go travel somewhere in the middle of the summer. Maybe he went somewhere to lose his velvet or something changed. But that was the one time I went in there and
started falling.
Yep. Something
like that. Yeah.
And I was in there for, 8 minutes in and out. Very low impact. But besides that, I just stayed out of there the whole summer. So yeah, when I got to the tree opening evening, there was a little bit of trimming to do. And I just carry, on public land, you can't do any of that. But on private land, you can kind of trim whatever you want. And I always carry a pair of those like ratchet clippers. You know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. And man, you can cut like 2-inch limbs off super quietly with something like that, as opposed to carrying a saw or something. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I got all that settled, everything cleared out. I had my nice lanes across the creek to where I'd been getting pictures of this deer, and got my main camera set up, got my GoPro set up, and sure as shit, it just starts sprinkling, and I'm like, I didn't look at the rain weather. Like, is it supposed to rain? Like, I'm sitting there, and I'm like, I don't know why I didn't think of it. A freaking hurricane's coming up, the coast or whatever. But I look at my radar, and I'm like, I'm about to get hammered. And dude, it downpoured for 30 minutes, just. But I kept pulling my phone out, and I kept looking at the radar, and I'm like, it's going to clear up. It's not going to completely clear up, but it's going to slow down a lot in that last hour or 45 minutes or something like that. So I'm sitting there getting soaked. I ended up taking my main camera and putting it back in my waterproof bag and putting it away. And I know, I dude, don't get me wrong. I love filming. I love making videos. It's like a huge passion of mine. But when it comes to shooting a buck, I remember I said, if I put this camera away, if that buck walks in, I'm shooting it, whether he's on video or not. This is not, if I'm putting this camera away and I'm not going to shoot this deer because I'm not going to get him on film, then I just need to leave. And I didn't. So put that camera away. I kept the GoPro out, obviously, because they're waterproof, and just kept that as an option, which it worked out in the end.
Turned out awesome.
Yeah. And, I'm getting downpoured on. It starts slowing down a little bit, and I look up the main path that comes down out of that clear cut, and here comes this little 6-pointer or 4-corn or something. I'm like, oh, cool, a deer. And he's just walking through the rain, super quiet. And like I didn't hear him at all, just saw him. And remember, it's raining, so I can't really hear a lot either, right? So I'm watching this buck, and he comes down to the creek bank, and he starts walking up the creek bank, and he's smelling, and then he just stops, and he like head up, ears forward, and he looks super alert. And my first thought was, because like when it was raining, the wind kind of did a little switcheroo and started getting sucked back up to like the east, like along the creek. And my first thought was like, oh crap, that he's winded me, he busted me, he's gonna catch me, you know. And I'm sitting there and I'm staring at him, and then I just, behind me, I hear splash, 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 and I'm like, immediately I'm like, okay, he didn't bust me, he's looking at a deer, there's a deer behind me. So I do one of these, like turn slow, 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 the tree, like pretend the tree's right here in front of me,
right in front of you.
This little buck is like here, or no, sorry, this little buck's like here in front of me, and I hear splash behind me. So I turn like this, and as soon as I like get to like, I don't know, 90 degrees, I see this giant buck in the brush just standing there. I could see his ears kind of moving, and I saw him like turn his head, and I could see his tongue like flicking around as he's standing there in the brush, and he's at 15 yards. So I'm like, holy crap, that's him. Like immediately, that's him. Like I didn't even need to look at his antlers. I could just tell. I'm like, oh my God, that's the deer. Like he's real. Like this is the deer I've looked at. There. And he's right there. And he's on my side of the creek. So, and we'll talk about that when I talk about going in and kind of checking out where he's bedding. But, so like I'm like kind of freaking out because this deer is 15 yards away from me. There's another deer on the other side of me. My bow's still hanging up, and I'm kind of turned the wrong way. But I'm in this tree. I'm in this maple tree that's like triple, quadruple trunk, tons of cover, man. I'm hidden really well. And when I tell you I got away with like so much to kill this deer, like I'm not kidding, man. So I actually like I turned back this way. I grabbed my bow and I turned all the way around, and I'm in a saddle, so I had to like drop down low and put my right thigh against the tree, and then like pivot around, and I'm just like kind of sitting and hanging with my knees, you know, with my butt almost against the tree and my knees facing out away from the tree, so the deer is on my shooting side. But he's like, if I'm in
so for all the saddle people out there, you maxed out your bridge, right? Maxed from one side.
Yes.
Maxed it out to the knot, and you were swinging strong side, but instead of doing like where the tree's at and your tether's on there, you do like a 180.
Yes.
You had to do like a 260 to get him.
Yes. Because it
was directly on your like, what do they call it? Like the blind zone or your bad side. But he's on your bad side at like 10 yards.
Yes.
You couldn't even, there is no bad. It's an impossible shot. So you have to spin strong side, max it out, and do like a 260.
Yes.
To get
it's crazy. So I literally did all that, and he never moved, and he's just staring at this other buck, and I'm just like, okay, like got away with that. That's crazy. And there's like a little tributary or drainage that runs into the main creek between me and him. And my tree's kind of like grown on the little island that drainage has like created. And so I'm like, he's got to cross that drainage, and then I'm going to have a wide open shot at 8 yards, 7 yards right here. So he goes to jump that drainage, and I go to draw back, and I get like maybe 3/4 of the way back or half the way back, and he just keeps walking, and I'm like, so I like let down, but then he just stops like right at my tree at probably 3 steps. And from where I'm sitting, I don't really have a shot because there's some brush between me and him. So I'm like, I'm thinking, I'm like, oh crap, what do I do? And there's just like a lot of stuff going through my mind. And he starts making a scrape like on the tree that I'm sitting on or sitting in. And I'm looking down under my armpit at this deer. And he's looking up at me with his eyes closed. I can hear him breathing, and he's like rubbing his, orbital glands and his glands, his antlers and everything on this limb right below me. And I'm just like looking right down the barrel of his nose. It was crazy, man. And I remember just thinking like, okay, like I have to shoot this deer right now, or I'm probably never going to see this deer again. Like I got to figure out how I can get a shot at this deer. So while he's doing all that,
well, let me jump in.
Go ahead.
Let me jump in quick.
Go ahead.
The tree you were in was a triple trunk maple.
Yeah.
With an unbelievable amount of branches.
Lots.
It's just to set the scene, because when I came to help you, man, I looked at the tree and I'm like, there's like no lanes out of this tree, which I think helped you in that, spotting movement in that thing, especially on a rainy, semi-windy day. Like you had like a blanket around you of leaves.
Yep.
And anything that you trimmed literally was your only shots.
Yeah.
So you literally trimmed your shot to shoot across the creek. You had no other windows to shoot anywhere outside of the limbs that you trimmed to put your sticks to climb up the tree.
Yeah.
So you had a 10-yard shot where you walked in, where you cleared the lane for your sticks. Yep. And then you had the little window to shoot across the street or the street.
Yeah.
That's it. There were like 500,000 leaves on that tree.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a blanket. It was wild. You couldn't hardly see through it.
A lot of cover. Cover.
Tons of cover, but it limits you in, you had to make a decision right then and there, because if he took any more steps in any direction, you had no shot.
Yeah.
There were branches, there were limbs, there was too much between you. I just had to make that very clear, because when I got in there, I'm like, you literally had two options.
And that's part about...
and somehow he walked into the one option.
Yeah.
And didn't bust you.
Didn't bust me. Yeah, that's crazy. I'll talk about that. But like having the one lane, kind of just goes back to being confident about where you think that deer's coming from, right? And where you're going to shoot him. And I was really confident that, that's where I was going to get my shot, across the creek. I'll be completely honest. I thought I was going to shoot across that creek to kill that deer, not on my side of the creek. It worked out, but yeah, a lot of cover. So I had just a wall of leaves around me, and where this deer was standing, all I could see from, where I was sitting at this point was his butt. And I had to do some crazy gymnastics, like stuff. I drew back and I just started leaning and leaning and leaning and leaning and leaning. And I just settled that pin to where I could see his vitals. And I settled that pin just behind his shoulder, just to the, to the left side, his left side of his spine, and pointed it right at his heart and just let go. And I was 8 feet above his head, 9 feet above his head. Like, it was crazy, man. I literally couldn't believe it, dude. Like, after I shot him, I was just like, what? Opening evening? What?
With like a directly, pointing straight down shot. I mean,
crazy, dude. But he took off like a bat out of hell. And my first impression when I shot him was like, I was like, done. Like, smoked him, dude. I felt so confident about how I hit him. And I watched him running, and he was just, them big bucks don't want to die, dude. He was just hauling ass down along the creek, and he come out into this little opening, and I literally watched my arrow just go like fly out of his shoulder into the bushes, and he just disappears into the cattails. And I'm like, what? Like, my arrow just came out of him? So my first thought is like, maybe I didn't get it as much penetration as I thought, you know?
Yeah.
So I kind of start worrying, you know? So I called you, and we talked a little bit, and I remember you were like, dude, you crushed him. He's dead. He's dead. He's dead, you know?
Because, just the way you explained it, your confidence, did you, because I kept asking, I go, did you put it into that, into the moneymaker, into the boiler room? Did you get it in there? You're like, yes. You go, but you had reservations, right? The arrow came out the way it came, you did not get a pass through, which not ideal.
Well, whenever I don't get a pass through immediately, I'm like, oh my God, what went wrong? You know, like, I'm not going to find this deer or something. Whenever I don't get a pass through, it's not my favorite thing. So,
yeah. Because you don't get a pass through, you're not getting any blood.
Exactly.
It's going to be tough going.
Yep.
And the fact that you shot, damn near straight down on him, his one exit wound is on the top of the bottle, right? On the top of the beer can. So it's not at the bottom, so nothing's going to be leaking out.
Yeah. Well, let me say this too. I do not recommend that shot to anybody. If you don't have to take that shot, like, I don't recommend it. I have practiced that shot multiple times this summer and felt confident in making that shot because it is different. If you're going to shoot straight down out of a tree stand, you're not putting your 20-yard pin on them. You're aiming, like, I aimed with my 35 or my 40, dude. Like, I put my 20 on his other side of his shoulder.
Okay.
Because I got a one pin, right? A single pin.
Yep.
So I put my single pin is set at 22, I think, or I had it set at 20 because my main shot was going to be like 18 yards. So I set it at 20 on the dot. And I put that 20-yard pin, like, almost, if you're looking straight down at the deer, almost like on his other shoulder, about to be off his body. And that's where I ended up hitting him. So You have to practice that shot, and you have to know what your bow does, and because if you don't, you're going to miss him, or you're going to wound him, or you're going to, hit that deer and not find it. But like I said, I wouldn't recommend taking that shot just because of what you're saying, John, is like, you're not going to get a lot of blood if you don't get a pass through. If you get a pass through, I bet he would have been done in 40 yards,
I mean, he'd been spraying all over the place.
Yeah, but like, no pass through. The hole is on the top of his back. So think about how long it's taking for that cavity to fill up with blood before it starts, coming out of that hole and coming out of his nose. It's not a very, especially in the rain, you're not going to get a lot of blood, and it's raining. So unless you're really confident about the shot, and like I said, I was literally 8 feet from this deer when I released the arrow, and I had practiced this shot. I'd felt pretty confident, so I felt confident enough to take that shot, and it worked out. But I was nervous when I saw that arrow come out of him. Yep.
Yeah.
I ended up calling a dog tracker after I talked to you, and I talked to him, and he was nice enough. He almost kind of talked me out of hiring him. He was like, just do me a favor. He said, go look at the arrow, and send me a picture of what that arrow looks like. And I, waited till it was just about dark, climbed down. I felt pretty confident because there was a little wind. It was wet. The wind was in my favor. And I could be quiet as all get out, getting up to find that arrow. I got a lighted knock on it, so I didn't have to like search for it for very long. Found the arrow. I had about 10 or 12 inches of just solid blood, and it was like lung blood on the
frothy
arrow.
Yeah,
frothy. But the broadhead was gone, right? Which immediately made sense in my head. Okay, I got a lot of penetration. The broadhead snapped off, and that's why the arrow fell out, right? If you don't got the broadhead hanging on to anything, comes right out. So I felt way better when I found my arrow, dude. I remember I sent you a picture. You were like, done. Like, yeah, I felt.
Yeah. It was all good looking blood, frothy, just it didn't look like muscle blood.
Yes. Yeah. I
It had
sent.
that like pinkish hue to it.
Yes. Yep. And it like stuck to stuff too. Like it was like
Very
lung blood,
sticky
like when it
almost.
hits, it just like splatters almost. Where I think like muscle blood is more of like it, it drips or it kind of.
Very
It's different. It's just
yeah.
different viscosity, I
It's
guess
like
is the word.
watery. Yeah.
Yes, watery. But I sent that picture to the dog tracker, and he essentially was like, "That deer's dead, bro." He was like, "Track it, see if you can follow blood for like 100 yards, and if you don't find the deer within 100 yards, he said, back out, and I'll meet you there in the morning." So I took his advice. I gave it a little more time. I gave him, I went back to the truck and hung out for a little bit and gave him about an hour and a half. Came back, found the arrow again, started finding blood and started tracking blood. And it was, dude, we're talking like pinpricks, like little tiny specks of blood that was just hanging on because they landed in the right spot because all the grass was covered in water. And it was kind of sketchy too because I'm trying to stay off of the blood trail the whole time I'm tracking. But
yeah, because if you walk through it, it's that bead of blood with the water is
gone
to your pants, and it's gone.
It happens so many times because like I'm in that like tall like grass, wetlandy like switchgrass. I don't know what you call it, but like if you step, like grass 10 feet away is moving around and everything. So every time I took a step, I'd watch the blood just beat up and swoop right off into the dirt, and I'm like, no. So like it was kind of sketchy. So I'm like really taking my time and I'm looking way out ahead of me and my light is just like, catching, glares of like red and blood and everything finding. And it was just slow going for a long time until I hit this little creek and he had to jump this little creek. And when he did that, I don't know, something happened because after he like got up out of that creek, it looked like he fell almost or like sunk in the mud. And when he got up out of that, he started like really spraying blood good. And I found him dead like 50 yards after that.
Wow.
Which was such an awesome feeling, dude.
Oh, yeah. Unbelievable.
I mean, it was like a little roller coaster. I can't tell you how. I mean, you know how it is, how freaking cool it is to shoot a buck like that and walk up on it when you're like worried about finding it and everything. It's just like the level of relief and the weight off your shoulders and the excitement. And dang, dude, like it was so awesome, man. I couldn't have asked for it to happen any different than the way it did. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Unbelievable. How far, well, I know, but how far do you think you went?
Like 250 or 270, I think, is what I did the like Onyx tracker. Yeah. So he went in
ways.
Yeah, he went a long ways, man. He went a long ways. But luckily I think the cattails kind of slowed him down towards the end. But just wild, dude. I don't believe that.
When you called me, I was so ecstatic. I was out and about with my wife and some friends, and when you called, I was just, dude, fist pumping it, in the air. Yeah. I was pumped up, man, for sure.
I just like a opening day buck like that. Like, I don't know. I had no. I would have bet money.
The fact that you had history, you had pictures, you put in extra effort, right, in putting together the wind map, trying to pattern him. There was a lot that went into this, into this deer. This wasn't like a, rut funnel where, hey, shooter's coming and I whack him. There was a lot to this guy. The uniqueness, right? 2 trunks. Dude had 2 beams. So cool.
Wild, dude.
Way bigger than anything else you had on pictures.
Giant body. Big body, dude, bro. Big
body. Right? That's a funny joke that we, constantly say, but did you look at the pictures with him next to other deer and you're like, he's a different class, right?
Different thing. Yep. Yeah, and you can really tell, like, I listened to something the other day that, like, made a lot of sense. If you put a line down the middle of the deer's body, you split him in half, like if he's standing broadside, which way is he going to tip? A mature buck is going to tip shoulders first. A young buck is going to tip ass first, pretty much, is what this guy was saying. Because their shoulders and their chest, a mature buck just gets so big. And, dude, like, I remember that's all you kept saying. Like, look at his forearms, dude. Look how big his forearms are. And he was
so
big.
Yeah.
Dude. I mean, dragging him out sucked, dude.
Dude,
that was so much work.
So I was out and about, and I told my wife, I go, honey, once we're done, I got to go. She goes, all right. Yeah. So I ended up leaving at like 10 p.m. The kids are in bed. My wife's like, I'm going to bed. And she goes, good luck. She goes, I'm not staying up for you.
Yeah.
Cruised an hour, got there. You were able to get all your stuff back out, get everything at your truck, brought you some waters. We chugged some waters because we knew what we were getting into. But yeah, as soon as I saw him, dude, he looked different. Dude, his forearms were like bigger than my biceps. His forearms.
Huge,
what?
Huge, dude.
Dude, he was so long. I don't think I'd ever, put my hands on like a bigger deer. In all honesty, I don't know that he's going to score super high, but
no, probably not.
He was something to see and to put hands on. When just dragging him out, you're right, sucked. The fact that he ran through a swamp, right? Dude, he was heavier than anything I'd picked up and tried to carry. He had a huge pumpkin head. Just from the top of his back to like his brisket was impressive. Like you said, older deer have bigger front ends, front halves. It was significant. I was just looking at him like, oh, now, dude, you put a good shot on him. And that's my thing, man. We watch all the videos, whatever. That's like my thing. Like, I get into it. Like, what is the science behind the shot? What happened? Yeah. Let's diagnose it. Let's figure it out. And, you were behind the shoulder, right? Mm-hmm. Right next to the spine.
Yeah.
And it came down by his armpit.
Yeah, it was literally
his back shoulder here. Armpit. It looked, you mentioned when you gutted him, it popped one lung, which I think gave him the oomph to get that far. I have a hard time believing him going 300 yards
on double
lungs. Yeah.
You never know. I know I had to have gotten an artery in there or something too.
Definitely. Oh yeah, he went right through the boiler room.
There was so much like hemorrhaged blood in his front cavity when I was gutting him. Like he was a dead deer running immediately, But that's what I think. You never think that because it took me 2 hours to track that deer and find him, but he got there in 12 seconds. You know what I mean? So like, it happens a lot quicker than it seems. Like, it seems like 250 yards is so far, but like, it didn't take him very long to get there. So it's a little different, but
right. But strapping him on that cart, I just kept having the visual of, my deer on that cart, this dude in the background here, and he's like a 3-year-old, right? And then having that one on the cart and the difference between me hauling him out by myself with one arm, just cruising, like walking, like, hey, all right, ain't no big deal. And then hauling this deer out with both of us, giving like effort, pulling hard to get him out. Big time weight difference. I know we both kind of thought about it, and he cracked 200 easy.
I
200
think so.
pounds.
Yeah,
Definitely.
gutted. I think
Gutted.
it was 200 gutted. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be really interested to see what the taxidermist says how old he thinks he is. I'm interested because I'm guessing he's at least a 6-year-old deer. I would think.
I definitely put him in that category, 100%. Just
crazy.
So lengthwise, right? We got him into your truck, and we scooted his ass all the way in the back of the bed, right? Dude, his nose was over and onto the tailgate.
Yeah.
So for the listeners, lengthwise, on the bed of a truck, his ass all the way in the back, his nose on the tailgate. Just long, heavy, big deer. Big old fat paws. So when you're looking at tracks, right, you use that 3-finger gauge. We were looking at his feet, and he was all of, his hooves pushed together. He was wider than my 3 fingers.
Yeah.
Incredible. Congratulations.
Thanks,
I'd
man.
be very, very, very proud.
There's a little bit of like, oh, I wish it would have taken me a little longer. I wish I was still hunting. There's always some sadness, or not sadness, that's a bad word, but like a little somberness when you kill a deer that you've had pictures of and you've been chasing for a while, or you just know this deer because like it's awesome that you killed him and it's over, but at the same time it's like, okay, it's over, like now what? Now I gotta find another deer to hunt, and build that same feeling and anticipation and all that stuff. Like the funnest part of everything is the actual chase of it, right? Like when it's over. But yeah, I'm so happy, man. Very blessed.
It's that adage of if anybody listens or watches like Steve Rinella stuff, and he's like, I just pass on the first day just because I have to feel like I
work for it.
It has to suck a little bit for you to really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true, but at the same time, it's like, well, now I can go to Kentucky and try and fill that tag. So
sure, yeah,
but. Super awesome deer, beautiful deer. I'm very blessed. I'm very excited to have killed him. But the other thing I want to talk about real quick, and then I'll kind of keep this short, but it's super cool, and anybody who's listening,
the entire puzzle together.
Yes. So I encourage everybody to do this because I've been doing this the last like 3 or 4 bucks that I've killed. A day or two or within a week after killing that deer, go back and retrace that deer's steps before you shot him, right? Because to me, you're going to learn so much more about that deer, or about deer behavior, or about, your property that you're hunting, by doing something like that, especially an early season hunt. And when you're talking about bedding and stuff, it's not just like a rut funnel or something like that. You're going to learn a lot about the deer you're hunting, or, the property you're hunting, or deer behavior. And like I said, I've been doing this. So I'll kill a buck. I'll go out the next day or a couple days later, and I'll get on that trail that he came in on, and I'll just walk it back and see what he was doing before he ran into me. And I did the same thing for this deer. I actually just got back from there tonight. And let me tell you, it did not disappoint, John. It was freaking badass, dude. So for the listeners, like I was telling you guys, there's this creek that runs through the property and makes this big kind of peninsula out on the like floodplain, right? And so the whole... how do I explain this? So the pictures where I was getting this buck, he was always bedding kind of towards the west end of the property. It seemed like down in this peninsula, right? And he would always walk head east along the creek bank. whenever he was leaving or coming back. Well, I jumped on that trail and I started walking where that deer walked in, and I started walking, and the trail kind of goes up and kind of starts sidestepping the hill along the bank of the creek, because he came in right along the creek, but on my side of the creek. And I'm following it, and I'm not seeing much. It's kind of like a not really worn down trail. And then it kind of dead ends into this like real thick stuff, and there's a big tree limb. And the whole time I'm standing there and I'm like, dude, there's no way that buck walked through there. No way. Right. Mm-hmm. So I like kind of back up and I start just like peering off the trail, like into this thick stuff, because this trail runs along the creek, but above the trail, it's like thick briars. Right. So that's where I originally was thinking, like, maybe he came from up there, right? Because he was on my side of the creek. And I'm like poking my head in. I'm not seeing anything that like screams buck bedding, you know? And I'm like, well, maybe like he wasn't bedded up here. So then I start thinking I did hear him splashing, right? But it was raining. I didn't hear it that well. So then I was like, maybe he actually crossed the creek behind me when I was watching this other buck. And John, I think that's what happened. So
really?
Yes, dude. And so it was downpouring when I'm watching this buck, and I'm literally looking the other way. And what's crazy is if I would have been in any other tree without the cover, dude, he could see me the whole walk down that creek bank. I was like right there, but I had so much cover around me. I don't think he would have spotted me. But when I was watching this little buck, I hear splash, splash, splash. And then I like turn around slowly. And when I turn around, he's standing there at 15 yards. And there's nothing really that he would have went splash, splash, splash coming down the hill. He had to have crossed the creek, right? And there's a really shallow spot, maybe 45, 50 yards up from my stand, where there's a big creek crossing right there where they cross. So I come back. Oh, sorry, guys. So I came back down the trail, got to that trail, crossed the creek, and started following that up the bank. And I could turn around and I could see my tree the whole way I'm walking. But this is starting to make more sense, right? I'm like, dude, I know he's been bedded on the far side of the creek all summer. Why is he all of a sudden bedded up here? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Well, I get maybe 150 yards down that trail, and there's a giant bed like right underneath this, I don't know what kind of tree it was, and there's some brush around it. And then I start looking around, and there's a fresh rub here, there's a fresh rub there, there's a fresh rub here, there's 2 or 3 trails coming out of this bed going to the north where I'm getting pictures of him at the mineral lick, and then there's another trail going out like kind of towards the select cut area, that thick area. And each one of these trails, I followed all of them maybe 100 yards, just littered with rubs, fresh rubs like this, up and down each one of those trails. Like he's just coming back and forth, and just right to this bed. So what's really cool about this bed, it didn't look like it was super fresh, but I mean, it rained for like 4 days after I killed that deer. So I looked for hair. I didn't really find much. But it was 100% a deer bed. Like he had his back up against this log and just this little canopy. It was like a hole just dug out, perfect for a buck. And on an east wind, right, if he's sitting there, the creek wraps around to the south and the west of him, and he's got his back 10 feet from that creek, right? On an east wind, he can smell the access path that I walk in on and cross the creek in that access path. So he's sitting there on an east wind, smelling everything that where he normally associates danger coming from, right? Coming from across the creek, coming down that access path. That's where all the tractors and all the roads and everything is that way. Behind him, he's got a 20-foot wide, waist deep creek protecting his backside. And then like to the north of him is just like kind of wide open grassy floodplain with like maple trees kind of mixed in. So he can see kind of far. which to me, when I got down in his bed and I'm sitting there thinking about like an east wind, he's like bulletproof, dude, on an east wind sitting there. He's got the visual, he's got the backside protection, he's got the wind all in his favor. It was pretty obvious. Like, this is where he's been hanging out all summer. And there was fresh rubs going like up the trail straight to that mineral lick where I've been getting pictures of him coming back into the bedding area. Pretty wild, man. It was just like I was like, oh my God, it all came together. So I think he was bedded right there, got up, walked down the edge of that creek, crossed the creek behind me, which would have been amazing footage. But I was too busy watching this little forkhorn. Then I hear splash, 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 turn around, and, he's 15 yards away from me. It took, a whole 5 or 6 seconds for me to turn around. Yeah, man, it was pretty wild, pretty cool.
So, all right, let me ask you this. On that easterly wind where he's bulletproof, why did he not smell you?
Because he didn't plan for a southeast wind, which is what that was doing. And where that tree's located is kind of by design too, because you got to kind of see where the topography is or what it's doing down in there. But the creek is obviously, the creek bottom's all flat. But right behind me, there's like some topography, a big hill that kind of comes up, maybe, 50 feet high, probably. Like, I was 25 feet high or 10 feet. I don't know. How high was I? 15 feet in this tree. And the top of this hill is way above my head. Right. So because of that topography and the wind coming out of the southeast, it was hitting my tree. And then I could drop milkweed and it would blow like kind of along the creek, but more at an angle towards that hill. And when it hit that hill, it would just curve straight south.
Oh.
So that topography was like creating a little bit of an eddy or a current.
A hard south wind versus
exactly. So my scent wasn't actually making it down the creek. Maybe some of it was, but not enough that he caught me. It was also raining, right? Because that deer, I literally killed him where I stood and hung my tree and hung my stand. I had my pack laying there. I had my stand laying there. And
that's unbelievable, that
he walked right there.
Away with that because, dude, down in Kentucky, it was, I got burnt by that big buck and it was an hour and a half old and he hit my boot tracks like there was dynamite under the ground,
Yeah. Hunting in the rain's good. Like, I talked to my dad about this, and my dad, the first thing he said was, everybody talks about being in the tree hunting, after rain. But if you're waiting until it's done raining to walk to your tree stand, you're already too late. Like, if you want to hunt in the rain and get the best out of it, I really do think you need to be in the stand while it's downpouring and be in because those deer both got up and were moving as soon as it started letting up. So,
wow, a lot of lessons learned there.
Yeah, man. I mean, and what's cool about, going back and finding that bed and everything, like, it wasn't like crazy sign though. Like, I was kind of picturing walking back there and there just being like 6-inch rubs just tore up, destroyed, and hair in beds and, scrapes and all this stuff. It wasn't like that. It was very subtle. I mean, we're talking trees about this big and they were rubbed up and I counted probably.
So you made how big, like a quarter.
Yeah. About like that. That's all I was finding.
That's listening. Yeah.
And there was, maybe 15 of them in a 2.5 acre area. So it wasn't like it was like destroyed, right? So what do I learn from that? I'm going to take that with me. Well, first off, I learned that a big mature buck likes to bed right there on this property. And I'm going to be looking out for that next year because they're like fish and another one's just going to take that spot. Second off, if I'm going to other properties or I'm going to Kentucky, just because you're finding quarter size or dime size rubs and it's not destroyed, doesn't mean there's not a giant buck there. Right. Like,
sure.
It can be subtle. And I think in Kentucky, it's going to be subtle for the most part. You're probably not going to walk into that buck bedroom that, you find in Iowa and it's just destroyed, 6-inch, 8-inch rubs. It's going to be subtle. So, having confidence in finding stuff like that on public land and knowing like, all right, I'm going to hunt this instead of like where in the past I would always be like, I got to move on and find something better. I got to keep going deeper and deeper and then end up burning myself, or going too far or ruining a spot that probably would have been good because you're looking for something better. There was a giant buck living in there. It wasn't tore up to all get out. There wasn't rubs and scrapes and all this stuff. There was some rubs and there was a decent deer trail and there was some lightly used beds in there, but that was it. It wasn't like, if I was like looking for a place to hunt, I would not hunt there. I would have been walking and been like, keep moving. Swear, man. It was that subtle. Like,
wow.
But I know that's where he was down in their bed.
Yeah.
He had to be within at least 100 yards of where my stand was.
Woo.
So pretty wild, but
very wild.
That's the story, guys. Pretty exciting, pretty cool. Now it's John's turn. So we're actually we got a hunt planned. It'll probably be over by the time this actually posts, but so hopefully John can lay his tag on a buck or we can see a buck or something like that. But
that'd be sweet. That'd be sweet. The weather is changing. And,
yes.
I think we've both had wonderful experiences with big time temperature drops.
Yes.
On the earlier half of October.
Yes.
And I'm excited for it. And
that's what I killed my buck on last year, October 10th, cold front.
I've had some killer, interactions on something like this. So
yeah,
I'm excited to be in the woods,
So we'll keep you guys up to date with that. Sorry, go ahead.
We'll put together a plan. We'll get something going. We'll get something cooking.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun. Hopefully, we'll get some more hunting done this season. I got a trip planned to Kentucky again, obviously. Hopefully John can join me for that. I may be hunting in another state as well. I don't want to give too much away on that, but that's kind of in the works right now too. So yeah, a lot more content to come. Stay tuned for the next podcast. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but hopefully something cool. Hopefully talking about dragging John's buck out. But thank you guys for joining. Thank you guys for listening. Go watch the video. If you haven't watched it, go check it out. Buckeye Bowhunter YouTube channel. And hit the like button and subscribe for us too, because it definitely helps us out. With that said, we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for listening.